Hello and welcome back to RPGPHD. I'm Dr. Ben. I want to start with a scene that's happened at many tables, including mine. A game master spends considerable prep time building an important NPC, a tragic backstory, and a monologue ready to go. He plays the guy composed, low voice, total control, exactly the way a dangerous NPC gets played. The players nod along, feeling unimpressed. Then, same session, an old fence who's barely a footnote in the Game Master's notes says 3 lines, doesn't raise his voice once, and lets a question sit unanswered for a beat too long. The players hesitate, and someone asks if their character should be worried. This gap comes from somewhere else entirely. The crime boss had the better lines and more dedicated prep time. What changed sits underneath the words themselves, and the name for it is status. It belongs to a field of acting, and Keith Johnstone, who spent his career studying exactly why some performers read as dangerous, doing almost nothing, while others can't land a threat no matter how hard they push it. Much of his work applies directly to what happens at your table. So, let's get into it. Keith Johnstone was born in 1933 in Brixham, England. By the mid-1950s, he was working at London's Royal Court Theatre, where he eventually became associate director. Somewhere in that job, he noticed a specific problem. Actors who'd trained for years were often worse at improvising than kids who'd never had a lesson. Training was making people careful, and careful was killing the work. He spent the next couple decades building exercises to undo that, and in 1979 he put the whole system into a book called Impro, Improvisation and the Theater, still considered close to essential reading in improv circles. In 1972, he moved to Calgary to teach at the University of Calgary, and in 1977, he co-founded the Loose Moose Theatre Company, where he'd also invented theater sports, a competitive improv format he built partly by watching what professional wrestling does to get a crowd reacting. Johnstone taught until close to his death in 2023, and by then, his ideas had already spread into stand-up, corporate training, and film improv, usually uncredited. One of his core discoveries is the one I want to open with: status transactions. Watch 2 people talk for 30 seconds and you can usually tell who's one up and who's one down. It's rarely about a job title. A CEO can walk into a meeting and spend the whole time apologizing for taking up everyone's time, glancing at the door, letting an intern steer the conversation. The intern, meanwhile, might lean back, take a beat before answering every question, and let silence sit there until someone else fills it. Watch that room for 30 seconds with the sound off, and you'd guess the intern runs the company. It's in the pacing of their speech, how much space they take up, whether they finish their own sentences or wait for the other person to jump in first. Johnstone trained actors to play that constantly, because an audience reads status instead of just dialogue. Status isn't the same thing as power, and that distinction is what actors and game masters usually get wrong. A king can play low status, apologetic, seeking approval, flinching at eye contact. A beggar can play high status, still, unhurried, making the king wait for an answer. This is where a lot of NPC writing goes flat. A game master builds a villain with a tragic backstory and 3 paragraphs of motivation, then plays him exactly the way every other villain in every other campaign gets played. Composed, a little menacing, in control. Compare that to a crime boss who plays low status. He fidgets and over-explains himself, then laughs a beat too long at his own jokes. The table might read him as unpredictable, which can be far more dangerous than composed. Johnstone ran an exercise that shows how much of this happens below conscious thought. He'd have a group mill around a room greeting each other, then split them into 2 groups without telling either what the other had been told. One group held eye contact for a couple of seconds before breaking it, the other made eye contact, then glanced away and back. Within a minute, the room read as a real hierarchy. The group holding eye contact reported feeling powerful, and the people watching them agreed they looked it. The group breaking eye contacts felt small, and looked small too. That's the mechanism a game master is using when an NPC feels dangerous or feels pathetic, before they've actually said anything of substance. Pace and pitch do the same work eye contact does. A voice that stays low, slow, and unhurried reads as high status no matter what the words are. A voice that climbs in pitch, speeds up, or over-explains reads as low status, even mid-threat. A game master playing a crime boss who's supposed to be terrifying can undercut the whole read in one line just by rushing it. Here's an example of high status. Still, unhurried, a long pause before the line, no rush to fill the silence after it. You shouldn't have come here. Here's an example of low status. Quick, a half step back, eyes down. You shouldn't have come here. The lines are exactly the same, but what changed is everything underneath it. The pace, the pause, the eye contact, and that's the whole argument in one line. Status also isn't limited to how a character carries themselves. Johnstone pointed out it plays against rooms and objects just as easily as it plays against people. A character can walk into a throne room and read as crushed by it, by the size of it, or walk in and shrug the room off entirely, which reads as more powerful than the throne room is. The same logic works on a magic item, a ritual site, a dragon's hoard. The way an NPC or a PC treats the space tells the table about their status in relation to that space. Johnstone, in his second book, Impro for Storytellers, published in 1999, gives us another concept, endowment. The idea is that how other characters treat someone does as much work building their status as anything that character does on their own. A game master who wants an NPC to read as dangerous doesn't need him to threaten anyone directly. Having every other NPC in the scene visibly defer to them, go quiet when he walks in, choose their words more carefully around him, builds the status from the outside in. There's a direct line back to blocking and accepting, too. Johnstone noticed that actors playing high status tend to block by instinct, holding their ground and refusing whatever gets offered to them, while actors playing low status tend to accept, going along with whatever the scene throws at them. A high status NPC resists a plan almost by default, the same way a high status actor resists an offer on stage. A low status NPC folds more easily because folding is what the posture is built to do. Put that to work. A game master who wants the guard captain to take a bribe without 3 rounds of negotiation gets there faster by playing him low status from the start, uncertain, eager to please, than by making it about corruption. Reading status is the diagnostic tool. What you do with the read, whether you build on what a player just handed you or shut it down, is where the next piece of Johnstone's system comes in. Johnstone had a name for every line a scene partner hands you, an offer. It's the raw material of the whole exercise. One actor says, "Hand me that wrench," and the other actor now has a choice. Accept it, and the scene builds. Block it, deny the wrench exists, deny the workshop exists, redirect to something else entirely, and the scene stalls right there. That accept or block framework is where most people's shorthand for this idea comes from, even though the phrase itself isn't Johnstone's. Yes, and. This gets credited to him constantly, but it was never a line in Impro. What's in the book is blocking and accepting, laid out as 2 opposite instincts, and Johnstone's clear preference for one over the other. He treated blocking as the safer choice in the moment and the slower death of a scene over time, because it teaches your partner that what they bring you doesn't matter. He also wasn't naive about it. He didn't tell actors to accept everything without limit. One of his own exercises, Yes, But, has a performer accept the offer and then complicate it. Is that your dog? Yes, but I'm thinking of selling him. The acceptance is real. The complication is also real. He doesn't deny anything, and he doesn't hand anything over for free either. Now let's discuss railroading. You run it through Johnstone's framework instead of the usual narrative design one, and the railroad turns from a vague accusation into a specific move, a block. A player comes up with a plan the game master didn't write, so the game master tells them it wouldn't work, or the NPC conveniently isn't available, or the door is locked after all. That's a block. In the exact technical sense Johnstone used the word. The same reflex an actor has when a scene partner hands them something they didn't plan for. Johnstone's own answer to over-blocking translates directly to the table. Yes, but, aimed at players instead of scene partners. A player wants to bribe the guard captain the game master built as an incorruptible wall. Blocking it, the captain refuses, end of scene. Accepting with a complication, the captain takes the bribe and now owes a debt to someone the party hasn't met yet. The plot point the game master was protecting doesn't die, it just moves. This works at the moment-to-moment table level and at the system level too. A skill challenge with exactly one valid solution is a block built into the mechanics. Compare that to something like Blades in the Dark, where the flashback mechanic exists specifically, so a clever plan the players come up with mid-heist gets folded back into the fiction instead of shutting it out. The system is built to accept. The same choice shows up in scenes that have nothing to do with bribery. A player says they want to skip the front gate entirely and climb the tower wall instead. Blocking it, there's no handholds, it's smooth stone, that's not happening. Accepting with a complication, they climb it, but it's slow. And by the time they're over the wall, the guard shift has changed and somebody's noticed the rope. The climb itself never gets denied, the plan worked exactly as pitched, and the table still gets a complication to play through instead of a flat no. This same accept first instinct got baked into game design outside Johnstone's own field entirely. Say yes or roll the dice is the working version of it. If nothing in the fiction is at stake, the game master just says yes and moves on, and dice only come out once there's a real chance of losing something. The designers behind that principle weren't citing Johnstone, but the instruction is the same one his framework produces. Don't spend a table's time blocking something that costs the fiction nothing to allow. Compare that to a game built the opposite way, a tightly keyed dungeon crawl where the game master has pre-decided the one correct solution to a locked door, a specific key, a specific spell, nothing else works, is a block sitting in the adventure's design. Here's the trap version of this that gets misapplied constantly. Saying yes to the offer, then running the prepped plot point anyway. A game master lets the bribe work, but the debt owed never surfaces 3 sessions later like it was supposed to. That's tolerating the offer, not accepting it. And it reads exactly the same as blocking to the player who made it. If the yes doesn't change anything, it wasn't a yes. Accepting fixes the reflex to block. A second reflex sits underneath it, reaching for the clever answer instead of the obvious one. That's where Johnstone's next idea comes in. Johnstone built Impro around 4 sections: status, spontaneity, narrative skills, and masks. The spontaneity section is where he goes after the instinct that wrecks more scenes than blocking does, reaching for the clever answer instead of the obvious one. His argument runs against basically everything a smart person is trained to believe. Johnstone's fix was blunt. The more obvious a performer is, the more original they end up looking, because obvious is where a person's own specific self lives. Chasing cleverness pulls a performer away from anything only they would have said. This lands directly on game master prep culture, and it's an uncomfortable landing. A game master who's written pages of backstory for an NPC who's in one scene isn't always doing it because the scene needs 6 pages. Sometimes it's protection. Prep is a way to avoid the discomfort of standing in front of a table with nothing but your own first instinct. Johnstone's framework has a name for that too. The same fear his actors walked in with, just dressed up as diligence instead of stage fright. This isn't an argument for zero prep. Johnstone drilled his actors constantly for years before turning them loose to trust a first instinct on stage. The training builds the muscle that spontaneity draws on. What changes is what the prep is for. Prep that builds a game master's instincts, knowing the world well enough to answer any question about it without hesitating, functions completely differently than prep that's a script the game master is trying to keep the table inside of. Here's what that split looks like at an actual table. A player asks whether the Baron has any living relatives who might contest an inheritance. In this view, if the game master has spent their prep time understanding how succession works in this kingdom, who holds grudges against the Baron's house, what the political map looks like, the answer comes out immediately, and it's consistent with everything the table already knows. If the game master instead spent that prep time locking a mystery plot to a specific reveal 3 sessions out, the honest answer takes a pause because the real question running underneath it is whether yes breaks the plan. There's a concrete test for the difference, and it's the one Johnstone used with actors. When a player asks a question you didn't plan for, does your first answer come from the world you've built, or does it come from what you need to be true for tomorrow's encounter to work? The first is spontaneity doing its job. The second is the clever answer, protecting the plan instead of serving the scene. Spontaneity fixes the reflex to reach for the clever answer, but it leaves one question hanging. Where does an obvious answer come from when nothing in your prep covers it? Johnstone had an answer for that too, and it has less to do with instinct than where you're willing to look. Johnstone's third section in Impro gets less attention than status or spontaneity, but the core technique inside it is a really useful thing for a game master. He called it narrative skills, and the argument underneath it is simple. A story isn't just a sequence of things that happened. It's a sequence of things that happen connected into a pattern that reads as finished. Two random events aren't a story. Two events where the second one answers something the first one raised, that's a story. And it's the connecting that's the actual skill. Here's a specific piece of advice Johnstone gave improvisers, and it's the one worth stealing whole. When you get stuck, don't search forward for something new. Look back for something you've already shelved and bring it back into the scene. He built a whole technique around it, calling it Reincorporation, and it's built on a simple observation about how audiences respond. The biggest laughs and the biggest gasps in an improvised scene almost never come from a brand new idea. They come from something the audience forgot about, resurfacing exactly when it matters. This solves a very specific problem game masters hit constantly, the moment mid-session where you don't know what happens next. The instinct is to invent something new on the spot, and that's exactly the moment to do the opposite. Reach backward instead. The NPCs name a player made up as a joke 2 sessions ago. The object that everyone was afraid to touch in that first dungeon room. The rumor a player half invented while making small talk in a tavern that you never followed up on. Pull any of those back into the current scene and the table experiences it as a plan finally paying off, even though you're improvising it live right now using material that was just sitting there the whole time. Try it as a habit, and the effect compounds fast. A campaign where 3 or 4 small reincorporations happen over a dozen sessions starts to feel tightly woven, deliberate, authored, even when every single one of those callbacks was a game master reaching backward under pressure instead of forward into a plan. The players can't tell the difference between the game master planned this from session 1 and the game master remembered this from session 1 and used it well. From their side of the table, generally, those look identical. Whatever a player says at your table is never fully wasted because it can come back later and matter. The half joke, the throwaway detail, the plan that flopped 3 sessions ago, all of it is material sitting in reserve, not material that's used up the moment the scene it happened in ends. That instinct for reaching backwards runs into the hardest test when what's sitting there to reincorporate isn't a clever detail, but a flat failure. A plan that went nowhere, an idea nobody was proud of. Johnstone built a whole philosophy around exactly that moment. One more piece holds all of this together. Johnstone freed his actors from responsibility for the content of their own imaginations. An idea that showed up simply arrived the way weather arrives, independent of any decision or blame. That reframing is useful because it shifts the fear from, what if I offer something bad, towards something closer to, the offer isn't mine to defend. In this view, the game master's job is to make bad ideas more survivable, not to eliminate them at the table. When a plan doesn't work, that gets treated as information the fiction just produced. A game master who visibly builds on a plan that flops, finding what's usable in it before moving on, teaches the table the same thing Johnstone taught actors. The fiction absorbs the offer either way, so the only real risk is not offering one. Now let's look at some pitfalls. One version of this is treating yes but as permission to say no with extra steps. A player wants to bribe the guard captain and the game master says yes, but he reports it immediately, which functions exactly like a block while feeling like an accept. The test is whether the fiction moved, not whether you technically said yes. If the bribe changes nothing about what happens next, you blocked it and called it something else. Status played as costume instead of status played as behavior is another. A game master decides an NPC is high status and expresses that by making them a duke, a general, or someone with a title, then plays the dialogue exactly like every other authority figure at the table. Johnstone's whole point was that status lives in posture, pacing, and eye contact, not in the character sheet. A duke who fidgets and over-explains is playing low status no matter what the title says, and a beggar who makes people wait for an answer is playing high status the same way. Spontaneity, used as an excuse to stop preparing entirely, shows up just as often. Johnstone drilled his actors constantly before turning them loose to trust a first instinct, and that order makes a difference. Spontaneity works because the world in the game master's head is solid enough to answer from without hesitating. A game master who shows up with nothing is improvising blind, not being spontaneous. That's a different skill, and a much harder one to pull off well in front of a table full of people watching. Endowment gets misapplied too, usually as narration instead of demonstration. A game master wants a fence to read as dangerous, so they say out loud, "Everyone in the room is afraid of him." That line does none of the work endowment is supposed to do. What builds the status is watching every other NPC in the scene go quiet when he walks in, choose their words more carefully, defer without being told to. Endowment is a showing tool. Announcing status is just narration wearing the technique's name. Something still happens on a miss is supposed to keep a scene moving, not turn every failed roll into a worse outcome than a flat no would have been. Now let's look at a step-by-step guide. So, step 1. Before the session, pick a status for every NPC with a real scene coming up, not just a personality trait. Decide unhurried and uncomfortable with silence, or apologetic and quick to fill it, before you decide anything else about how they talk. The status choice comes first because it's the one thing that reads before a single line of dialogue does. Next, at the table, when a player hands you a plan you didn't write into your prep, default to yes but instead of a reason it wouldn't work. Let the plan succeed and attach a complication that costs something later, a debt, a witness, a changed guard shift, rather than a reason it fails now. If you catch yourself explaining why something can't happen, that's the block reflex firing. Redirect it into a cost instead. Next, when a player asks a question mid-scene that you didn't plan for, notice where your first answer comes from before you say it out loud. If it comes from the world you've already built, say it. If it comes from what needs to be true for a scene 3 sessions out, that's the clever answer protecting your plan, and it's worth catching before you speak it. Next, when you're mid-session and still don't have an answer, look backward before you invent something new. Check your notes or just your memory for anything you've shelved. An NPC's name mentioned once and never used again. An object that nobody picked up. A rumor a player half invented that you let drop. Pull it back into the scene you're running right now. That's reincorporation, and it's the fastest way to make an improvised answer feel like it was planned from session 1. Next, when a plan fails, whether it's a bad roll or a bad idea, treat the failure as new information the fiction just handed you. Find the one detail in the failed attempt worth keeping, the noise that gave away a position, the rope somebody noticed, and build the next beat out of that instead of just narrating a dead end. Next, before your next session, check your own prep against what it's for. Prep that answers questions you haven't been asked yet, the politics, the relationships, the standing threats, builds the instinct spontaneity draws on. Prep that locks a specific reveal to a specific moment is the plan you'll be tempted to protect instead of the scene you're supposed to be running. Keep the first kind. Cut the second kind down to what you can hold loosely. Johnstone spent 60 years teaching actors how to get out of their own way. So give some of these techniques a try at your table and see how it goes. If you found this video useful, then hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't, and if you try any of these techniques, I would like to hear about it, so drop the results in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching. See you next time.